Okay, well, since you wanted this, I was born August 17th, 1966, in Irving, actually. My mom has told me before she passed away, she told me that her and my father were sitting there waiting for me to be born, arguing about whether I'd have blue eyes or brown. Well, brown eyes won, but so I mean, I've always known that I was adopted, so that was never a big secret in the family or anything. That was kind of always known. Um, I've never got a hard answer on the circumstances of it. The closest thing I've gotten to a hard answer, well, okay, while my mom was still alive, she told me that she was not able to have children because of damage to her reproductive system from a beating that my dad gave her. That's what she said. And of course, I have no independent proof of that. But, and I'm not saying I doubt her, I'm just saying that's her story, but I don't have anything that backs it up one way or another. So she was unable to have children. Now, what she also told me that her doctor knew a woman that was going to have a baby. The story that I got at the time was that this woman was married to a service member who was overseas, so she could not have that baby at home when her husband got home from his overseas deployment. So she gave the baby up for adoption. That's the first story I heard. After my mom had passed, my aunt told me that the way she remembered it was a little different, and that my father, in one of his extramarital affairs, had impregnated a lady, and he offered to take the baby in, and my mom agreed to it. Now I have no idea if that's true. I just know that's what my aunt told me. Now, if that's true, it's pretty freaking impressive of my mom to take in her husband's affair baby. But needless to say, I don't really know what the truth is about it. Okay? I have no idea. Now, at some point, my mom and dad moved back up to Arkansas, where he was from. He was from Arkansas. My mom was from Nacogdoches. They lived in Dallas for a while, obviously, because that's the area I was born in. At some point, they moved back to Arkansas. Now, I don't really have much in the way of recollections about their life together. They divorced when I was 6. I have maybe 2 memories of them during their marriage. One of them is him beating the absolute shit out of her. I remember because I was in bed with my mom, and it was not very late at night, and she was awake. And I think I woke up, and I heard him come in, and he said, "When I get out of this bathroom, that cigarette better be out," because of course she was smoking a cigarette. Well, she didn't put it out. And he came out of the bathroom and he drug her out of the bed and commenced beating the crap out of her. And I don't have any visual memory of that because it was dark. And the only thing I remember seeing is the red light from the tip of the cigarette. But I do remember screaming at him to stop hitting her. So I don't really have much in the way of memories of them together. Now, after they split up, me and my mom ended up back in Texas. At some point, she sent me to Colorado to live with her sister and her sister, Sandra, who lived in Boulder, Golden, Colorado, up on a mountain. And I lived there for 2 years, maybe. Now, I do recall that that's when I learned what it was like living with my aunt. Sandra was a very strict disciplinarian with her children. She had 5 kids at that point. She had Don, Debbie, Kim, Andy, and Howard. Don and Debbie were from Sandra's first marriage to a man named David Davenport, who was a U.S. Navy pilot. And the next 3 kids, Kim, Andy, and Howard, were from their second husband, a man named Howard Shin. Don and Debbie, Kim, Andy, and Howard were all there in Golden, and any any little infraction, there was going to be a beating because Sandra didn't play that. Like I said, very strict disciplinarian, very prone to corporal punishment for the kids. Okay, which that'll become important later. Now, when we were leaving Colorado, my mom drove up there to get me and drove back down. While we were heading back down, her car broke down somewhere in southern Colorado, northern Texas, I don't remember where. And my grandfather, James Hooks, drove to it, and mind you, we're in a snowstorm and the car breaks down, and we're like huddling in the car for warmth and going into the gas station to use the bathroom for what seemed like maybe a couple of days, I'm thinking. I don't know. While James came up and got us and literally towed us back. And then that between then, which was like second, maybe third grade, until 6th grade, the next few years, that's what I call our vagabond stage, our hobo stage, because it basically consisted of us living here for 6 months and there for 6 months, and at this person's house and on this person's couch. And we, for a little while there, we lived with my Aunt Wanda. That was my grandma's sister. So she was my great aunt. My grandma, that was Mary Ann Hooks. She passed away in 1987? No, 88 maybe? No, 87. The end of 87, I believe, or the beginning of 88. Mary Ann Hooks was originally Mary Ann Smallwood, born and raised in Nacogdoches, where I'm at now. Her first husband was a man named John Dumas Smith, also a Navy man. And they had 2 children, Sandra, who's older than my mom, and my mom. And then, when they got divorced, she remarried James Hooks, or she got married again to James Hooks, and they had, in order, Defane and Sabathia and James Jr., who was called Snooter, and the youngest was Dominica. Now, my mom's gone, Sabathia's gone, Dominica's gone, Snooter's gone, so the only aunts I have left are Sandra, who, as far as I know, is still with us. But we've fallen out of touch. I need to really do something about that, but I never can seem to get her on the phone. And Defane, who, Defane, we used to be tight when I was a kid, and for several years she lived right up the street from us in Oak Cliff. There, I was on one block of Dutton, and she was like 2 blocks up on Dutton. Now. Let's see, Defane had 1 child, her daughter Celeste, with her first husband, Michael Ford. Okay. Now, Sabathia had 2 children with her first husband. Oh, and Celeste is still alive. She currently has like 3 daughters or something, I think. 3 daughters. Sabathia had 2 children. The oldest was a daughter, Lucretia. And the youngest was a boy named Carl Dustin. But everybody just called him Dustin. And he's currently incarcerated and is not due to get released until another 70 years. Long story. Didn't kill anybody, but the judge threw the book at him, gave him like 99 years. But then again, it was his 11th felony conviction, so yeah. All right. And let's see, James Jr., Snooter. He had several children. I don't really know. He didn't have any when I left to go in the Navy, so his children all happened while I was gone and away from the home. And so I don't really know how many children he had. I do know he had children, though. Now, Domenica has three children. The first two were with her first husband. His name was Joe Ivy. And the oldest was a boy, Joey, who's also currently incarcerated, but should be getting out relatively soon. And then a daughter named Tribius, who I believe is, I don't know if she's currently incarcerated or not, but she was recently. And then she had a third child with a guy named Bear Talley, the biker guy from Longview or Tyler or Mount Pleasant, something like that. But that's Corey Michael Talley, who I never gotten along with because he's an obnoxious pain in the balls. I even bailed that little idiot out of jail. Doesn't matter. He didn't even so much as come over to the house to thank me for bailing him out. So yeah, as far as I'm concerned, I don't really give a shit what happens to Corey Michael. But yeah, we were in this vagabond period, you know. We were living here, we were living there, we were living here, we were living there. Now, at the time, my mom told me that was because we were on the run from my dad, okay? According to her, according to my mom, my dad had sworn up and down that he was going to sneak back down to Texas and grab me out of school and supposedly threatened her with, if I get over the state line into Arkansas, you ain't never gonna see him again. That was what she told me at the time. Okay, now, obviously, I have no clue whether or not that's true. I do remember seeing my dad a couple of times. He was a truck driver. And my mom told me at one point around 1960 or 1961, he was involved in a really bad truck wreck that actually caused some brain damage with him, and that she thought that was the reason why he was so mean and violent to everybody. She actually told me a story one time that they were at the State Fair of Texas, and some guy had been looking at my mom wrong or whistled at her or something, and the story my mom told was that my dad proceeded to beat that man down till he was completely covered in blood. And so much to the point that the police led him around to try and get the guy to point out who'd done it to him, and he couldn't even point out my dad, even though he was standing right there, because he couldn't ID him. Okay, now I don't know if that happened before the wreck or after the wreck, but that was just a little story. Now, my mom also told me that my dad was a serial philanderer, that he banged everything he could bang anytime he could bang them. She even told me one time that he was accused of a rape by some woman that he met at a bar somewhere, and that they were going to examine the car for traces of blood because the woman had told the police that she was saying no to his advances because she was on the rag. She was during her period. So my mom said, well, we better go out in that car and just screw up. This is literally what my mom said. She told me that she was going to cover for him. So she went out to the car and they had lots and lots and lots and lots of sex so that she was, I guess, a reason for there to be any kind of evidence of sexual activity in the car. Again, I have no idea if that's true, but that's the story my mom told me. All right. Just one of those. Now, my dad, after they divorced, my dad proceeded to get married over and over and over and over and over and over. I know of at least 5 wives. Because there was my mom, and then there was some little redheaded gal, and then there was one named Marilyn, then there was another one named Laura, and then I know of one, Marty, Um, who, as an aside, that woman was the reason I just don't talk to my dad anymore. I've tried to reach out to him a couple of times, but around 2002, I was kind of in some dire financial straits. So I decided, you know what? That man never paid any of his child support. He technically owes me about 10 grand. So I'm just going to call him and ask him for it. And I'd never asked him for anything in my life. I'd never, so I call him and I plead my case. And he puts his current wife, Marty, who has since passed away. She's no longer with us. But he puts Marty on the phone and she starts taking over the conversation. And she mentions that, she'll charge me a little bit of interest, but it won't be too bad. And I was like, interest for money this man owes me? I think we're done here. And after that, I didn't talk to him again. Now, he called me a couple of times after my mom passed away to try and get me to come up there and visit him. Now, speaking of, he always, every time I talked to him, he always hammered home the point that I was his son, I was his son, I was his son. So that kind of lends credence to the story I was telling you about earlier about how I was actually the product of one of his affairs. So it may very well be possible because he always said, my dad has never in my lifetime that I recall ever said that I was just an adopted kid that they adopted. He has always maintained that I was his son. So that story may be true. I don't know. All right. But now, what I was saying about our vagabond period, our hobo phase there, is that my mom said we were moving around all the time because she was on the run. Now, knowing my mom, I have to admit that it's equally possible that she couldn't get along with anybody and would wear out her welcome, and we'd have to skedaddle down the road to live somewhere else. That's very possible. Now, when we were, I think 5th grade, living with Aunt Wanda, 4th grade, 5th grade, something like that. I went to the elementary school I was going to was Robert E. Lee Elementary School, which probably the lefties have gotten that renamed. And at that point, Aunt Wanda and my grandma and my mom had a weaving shop because all of them knew how to do weaving, like suit repair and fixing cigarette holes and clothes and things like that and alterations. They were all amazing seamstresses. They were all amazing at that. My mom was an amazing seamstress, and I know she learned from her mother. They were all amazing at that. And they actually did it professionally for a while. They had a shop over there. And it's actually kind of funny because one of the guys I went to school with at the time, of course we ended up moving, but I ended up moving. At some point we moved over to Grand Prairie. And I ran into the same kid again. It was like both of our families had moved. I was like, wow, that's weird. Okay. But yeah, we lived in a ton of different places. We lived with Aunt Wanda. We lived with a friend of hers who was it was a husband and wife truck driving duo. And I remember they had a huge freaking mounted moose head in their living room. It was crazy. I think her name was Laura. No idea what her last name is. Or was, I guess. There's no way that woman's still alive because that was back in the 70s and she was old then. We lived in a bunch of different places. We had a rental house for a couple of years in Irving. I think maybe part of 3rd grade. We basically moved every 6 months or so. So for like several years there, I never finished school in the same school I started it in. Because we always had to move. And like I said, I have no idea whether it was because she was legitimately worried about my dad chasing us down or because she just couldn't get along with anybody for more than about 6 months. I don't know. So it was move. So correspondingly, I just didn't have any time to make any friends. I'd make a friend and then I'd be gone and I'd have to make friends all over again. So I spent a lot of time on my own which is where I developed my love of reading. So that's where that comes from. Because when you ain't got friends, you read books, comic books, whatever. We lived in Grand Prairie, we lived a bunch of different places. And then, starting in 6th grade, we were again staying with my grandma on Center Street, right off of Jefferson in Oak Cliff. And this friend of my mom's, I think he was in some way, shape, or form related to my dad. The relationship there has always been kind of fuzzy. His name was Deard Briggs. Last name Briggs, like Briggs and Stratton. D.B. Briggs. That was his name. And he was apparently like my dad's cousin or some kind of weird relation like that. But him and my mom were really good friends. Him and his wife Sue and my mom, they even had anyway, Deard worked at a company called Dresser Industries, which was over in Oak Cliff on Illinois. And it was a good job, union job. And he managed to get her on there when I was in 6th grade. So that would have been, maybe 11, 12, something like that. And with that job and the steady income, we were able to get a rental house on Dutton Drive in Oak Cliff. And I started going to, I was going to Griner, which was over by my grandma's house in Oak Cliff. And where we moved to, I was literally like 2 blocks away from Stockard. So I ended up first semester of 7th grade was at Griner. Second semester went to Stockard. And then so the end of 7th and 8th grade there at Stockard. They're living there on Dutton Drive, and we ended up. That was the longest time we were ever in one place before I went to the Navy, because we were there from the middle of 6th grade all the way until like a year after high school. Yeah, year after high school. So I went to Stockard. Now my freshman year in high school, freshman year I went to Skyline, which was not considered a high school. It was considered a career development center, because what they would do is it was a huge honking school, and it was actually kind of located in central Dallas, and people from all over the Dallas Independent School District could apply to go, and if you got good recommendations from your teachers and you had decent grades, you might be able to go. And what they would do is they cut out one elective, and you spent 2 hours a day working in a career development cluster. So like I was it was called graphic arts, but what it was printing. And that's what the school did. They had a bunch of different clusters. They had childcare, horticulture, photography, drama, graphic arts, printing, journalism. And it was to prepare you and to give you experience so that you could get a job in that field when you got out of high school. Now I did that freshman year. Okay, now probably should have stayed there. Probably should have, but I didn't. I transferred back to Sunset, which was I was real close to Kimball, but I ended up being like a couple of blocks inside to go to Sunset. So I started going there mostly because I made a couple of friends at the YMCA pool or YWCA pool that was there on Hampton, right before the railroad tracks. And they went to Sunset, so of course they wanted me to go to Sunset, and I had this little girlfriend for about 2 weeks, and that was the first time I learned that summer girlfriends and boyfriends don't necessarily translate to school boyfriends and girlfriends. And that's when I learned the reality of the summer fling, because that's what I was to her. As soon as we got back to school, she didn't want nothing to do with me, which is okay. That's fine. I wouldn't have wanted to keep going out with her anyway, because the more I learned about her, the more I realized we were not compatible. So I transferred, and my mom was pissed. Oh, she was mad that I transferred out of Skyline. But anyway, so I transferred to Sunset, and the friends I made were all athletes. They were football players. but I couldn't play football. I didn't know what the hell I know nothing about football. So I became the manager. I was like the super manager for the football team. So much so that once football season was over, I had the baseball team and the track team, and then all the other coaches asked me, "Come, you should do this. You should come manage my team." Blah 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 blah. And I ended up second semester of the sophomore year, ended up managing the soccer team. So it was football and then soccer, and then school was just school. I wasn't particularly a good student. I was, C's and B's. Very rarely made an A. Let's see, junior year. Oh man, I did the football season, and then I didn't manage anything after that. I was kind of done with it. And I had gotten into, for junior year, I actually started taking choir. So I had started getting into, musicals, plays. Junior year, I had a lead in the, Sunset always did a spring musical. And I got a lead part, a non-singing part, which works out well because I couldn't carry a tune in a bucket. But I got a speaking lead part in the spring musical my junior year. The musical was called Dames at Sea, based off of an old play and an old movie. All right. Then senior year, senior year. Well, kind of, sort of halfway did a play. Yeah, it was called, it was about the Antrobus family. I had a non-speaking part in that play in the first semester, and then in the spring for the musical, we did Fiddler on the Roof. And I got a lead in that. I played Laser Wolf, the Butcher. So I was always busy, and truth be told, I wasn't particularly popular. Didn't have a particularly large group of friends, because I was just kind of always around, and I knew a lot of people, but nobody had ever really try to find me and get me included. I was bullied a lot by the football players because I wasn't one. My junior year, the football players actually thought it'd be real cute to take my car and put it between the poles of the swing set so I couldn't move it. Because it was a little car and they were big guys, so they had no problems moving it, but I couldn't do it. I couldn't do anything. I had no room. I couldn't back up or nothing, so there was no way I could, and I actually called the cops. The cops actually showed up to the field house there at Sunset, and the coach had to tell the players to go out there and move my car, which was one of the reasons why I was done with football. Another guy, Jimmy Woods. I'll never forget this. After the football games, it was kind of a Sunset tradition to go to Pizza Hut or Pizza Inn at Hampton in Illinois. And, like I said, I was bullied a lot. So Jimmy Woods decided because I'm stupid, I left my door unlocked. He decided to open the door in full view of everyone and just proceed to piss all over the inside of my car. Yeah. So that was what my high school was like. Almost never had a girlfriend. Did somehow manage to lose my virginity junior year. That was a disaster in the making. I'll talk about that later. But it wasn't because I was popular, and it wasn't because I was, wasn't because anybody wanted to be my girlfriend. Dated a couple of people here or there. Went out with Wendy Cloud for a while. Dated a girl named Michael Ann, I met at Skyline. Senior year, I had a girlfriend the first semester, but I screwed that up because, I'm a guy. I'm a teenage boy. I'm stupid. I often wish I could track her down just so I could apologize to her. But yeah, that pretty much gets me to graduation. And that'll be continued on the next one. Thanks. If you're still listening, congratulations.